So the irony is I have no technology whatsoever. I didn't even know what TEDx was. I had to ask my son, and he knew exactly what it was. I don't have a cell phone. I don't have a computer. But I have 3 kids, so I get exactly what you're saying. So I have no slides. It's just me standing up here. My name is Bryan Maddox. I've been teaching for 3-ish decades. I've born and raised in Colorado and been in Fort Collins for the last 3 decades teaching right here in this community. I teach at Centennial High School, which is one of the 5 or 6 or 7 high schools we have now, depending on how you count them. We're the alternative high school in town, not the alternative to jail. We're alternative education. If you have kids in school or you're familiar with the school system, a lot of people recognize Centennial as a school for the bad kids or the kids who don't fit in or things like that, which is absolutely not true. It's an alternative educational program. Educational reform is military intelligence or wildlife management. they're oxymorons. Educational reform is not a reality that I've seen. The last real educational reform, I think, was in the 1950s, and that's where they rebuilt the educational system. There have been a few systems, charter systems, some other systems that are kind of verging on reform, but there's really not been a reform. The idea is in the 1950s, the age that you could actually support a family was about 12 years old. So at 12 years old, you could drop out of school, you could find a job, you could get a house, and you could support a family. In the United States and in Colorado and Fort Collins, it's about 22 now. So at about 22, with enough education, you can move out, make enough, and still we have the exact same educational system. For instance, science, we have a few scientists here. I'm a science. I'm an advanced degree in biochemistry, which I don't know what you do with that except for clean dishware or something. But in the 1950s, the way they ordered science was biology, chemistry, and physics. They put them in that order. Well, they did it alphabetically. Well, if you know anything about science, the most advanced science is biology. Biology is a multifaceted, multidisciplined science, whereas physics, which is the most advanced, is the most simplistic and probably the most needed. But they decided to make physics harder by putting math on top of it. So the physics isn't hard, the math is hard. So educational reform I have not seen very much. So we've looked at educational reform within Centennial and within a program that's called Discovery. I didn't write Discovery, I was a partner in it. Eric Larson wrote it, and we used Discovery at Centennial High School. And what Discovery said is that kids were not being successful. We were not matching. The system and the kids were not lining up. I think right now statistics say about 18 to 20% of kids actually meet educational systems. The rest just get by. But the actual idea of how school is set up, where you sit, you get information, you throw it back up, and you give that information straight up, doesn't work for most kids. And what we found is we're finding more and more of those kids are just becoming disenfranchised, they're becoming fringe students, and we're losing more and more of them, which isn't good for us. It isn't good for our society, it isn't good for our culture. So we went to business. We went to business and said, what are you doing? What do you need? Because on some level, what we're trying to do, and I don't believe in this, I don't believe that education ought to set kids up for business. Education should set kids up for society. But one of those is business. One of those facets that we're setting kids up for is business. Well, what does business do? Well, those of you who work in a business, you know, if you have a new job, first thing they do is they orient you. They put you in. When they send you to McDonald's, they orient you by saying, here's how you deal with equipment, and here's how you deal with people. Here's how you deal with the fryer. Here's how you deal with the cooker at McDonald's. Here's how you deal with people. Here's how you interact. Here's how you talk to them. We found they don't do that in school. If you have kids in school, if you have people in the public school system, which I'm a huge advocate for public school, and there's a disconnect there. We don't orient kids. We don't go in and say, here's how you interact. Here's how you interact with the work. Here's how you interact with the equipment. Here's how you interact with your environment. Here's how you interact with human beings. Because it is a human being interaction that goes on in that. We don't orient them, we put them in there, and there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of fear that goes on. And that shows up in lots of different ways. So what does Discovery do? Discovery is an orientation model, or it's a model that says, here's how we're going to do these things. The idea goes back to the 3 things, the 3 R's. It's really ironic that the 3 R's in education, 2 of them don't start with R. Reading, writing, and arithmetic. I think that's a W and an A. I'm not quite sure how that one works. But our 3 R's are relationship, relationship, and relationship. That is where reform comes into us. How do you define relationships? The first relationship is self. Well, I like what you were saying about gaming. One of the things that happens with play is you get a relationship with yourself. By the way, your little game there where you did the little thumb, that reminded me of quite a bit of one of those Board of Education meetings. Hope there's nobody here from that thing. Relationship with yourself. You need to know about yourself. Theoretically, when you go to school, you're going to see how do I interact. When you read the classic literature, when you learn about the social sciences, about history, you're going to go, how am I not going to repeat that? How am I going to move through that again? So part of that is relationship with self. The second one is relationship with others. We have this very not intact system within our culture around relationship with others. We have a very junior high model of dealing with other people. Not to get political, but look how we deal with other countries. Look how we deal with conflict. Look how we deal with these people. It's not working. From my point of view, it's not working. The last one is relationship with your environment, which I really like these sustainability things. How do we foster and how do we teach a relationship with our environment? Whether or not that's the outside environment like we have here and the dams and the water and the things like that, or the environment you have within IBM or Jiffy Lube. Wherever your environment is, how do you teach that? Now to me, when I go back to that one, I go back to in a school, when I'm looking at a school and I'm working with a school, I ask them, would you allow that kind of behavior, those kind of actions to happen at Jiffy Lube? Would you allow them to happen at IBM? How do you treat your environment? And it's amazing how many behaviors that go on in school that they allow that would not happen in either one of those environments, from the blue collar to the white collar environment. So how do we foster that at Centennial? It's a 6-week course. Discovery was written. It's a curriculum. It has scope. It has sequence. It has an evaluative tool. It's designed as a boot camp. The best definition I've heard kids say about Discovery for the 30 years, actually I've been at Centennial for about 17 years now. It's boot camp, AA, and kindergarten is what Discovery is. And the boot camp is somewhere in life you just got to get up. At some point, the rubber hits the road. At some point, there are no more excuses. You got to get up and get something done. And somebody in your life has got to get and go, I'm the inspirer. I'm the motivator. The AA pieces, there's like this self-exploration, to be able to know yourself. Because if you don't know yourself, I'm not quite sure how you would interact with someone else. And then the kindergarten pieces is very common sense. What I found is there is no common sense. Common sense is not so common. There used to be a common sense, but there is no common sense anymore. So where do we get common sense from? Well, first thing we do at Discovery is we establish a culture. We establish a conscientious culture. We decide what that is. And when you look at the definition in a dictionary, one of the definitions for culture is, it's, for a scientist, I'm glad I have a scientist in front here, is, you swab your throat, you put it on an agar dish, and then all of a sudden something grows. Yeah, we got culture. Well, culture is culture is always changing. It's growing or it's dying. It's not status quo. It never sits still. So one of the things that companies or communities or families that identify culture, they actually are talking about it all the time. And if you look at culture, a lot of it has to do with language. And anybody sprechen Sie Deutsch? Any Germans here? No? Anybody know a German? Yeah. Well, if you know a German, first time I ever learned syntax or how the English language worked was when I learned German. Because in German, every single word fits in a very specific place and you don't ever put it anyplace else. Well, if you know any Germans, they're just like that. Everything has a place and it goes like this. Spanish. ¿Habla español? No, un poquito, excelente. But in Spanish, you put words wherever they go, You put them here. Sometimes you make up words and sometimes you put words together, And if you've ever been like Spanish, Central or South America, anybody been there? 1 o'clock, everything shuts down. They take naps, they sleep, they come back when they want to, Language is very, very powerful in a culture. Well, I don't see schools using language to develop culture. So the first thing we do is we develop a conscientious culture. We call it the 6 Ps. We say this is exactly what it looks like within this culture. This is what the language looks like. Imagine the word work. Imagine the word bread in Fort Collins. We're teaching up on the north side of Fort Collins. You have some people who are on food stamps. They go and they get food from the food bank. And bread is something that you get from there. You have some people who live over at the country club. When they go get bread, they go down to Whole Paycheck or Whole Foods or whatever that place is down there that I can't afford. You have some kids over there making their parents make tortillas in a very traditional way. So when I say the word bread in my class, I have all these concepts of bread. And they're all okay, they're all great. But I need to, in my class, to create a culture, or in my family, say, in our culture, in our family, this is what it looks like. No diminishment. Yours is great, but this is what it's going to look like. So language becomes very powerful. A word like work. You got somebody whose dad doesn't work. Mom's gone. Dad sits on the couch and work is go get me a Budweiser. That's what work means to one kid. Another kid, they have two parents. They work 70 hours a week. That's what works to them. Outside of my world, it doesn't matter, but in my world, this conscientious culture, we're going to create what that looks like. Those are the 6 Ps. Next thing we do is we get rid of the punishment model. Punishment model doesn't work. Schools are entrenched in the punishment model. You do this, we're going to make it hurt so bad you're going to stop doing it. That creates 2 kinds of kids. It creates victims and it creates criminals. I was more the criminal type. When they told me I couldn't do something, I'll show you exactly what I could do. But metal detectors, I grew up in South Denver. I don't know if anybody knows South Denver. Kennedy, yeah, metal detectors. I want to see, what can I get through the metal detectors? What exactly, how can I get around the cameras? I was the criminal type, but there's also victims. But punishment does not change behaviors long term. It does not. Punishment changes behavior short term, and it creates damage, and the damage takes a long time to repair. So we created a system, it's a behavioral teaching model that says, you know what, change your behaviors, and we're going to teach you how to do that instead of punish you. The third thing we do is a skills-based model. Skills-based model. How do you interact with your world? 2 stories. First story is 20 years ago, May 5th, I had an accident. I lost my eye in an accident. It's a very cool thing, you know. I can pop my eye out, it's glass. I can leave it on the desk. I walk out the room, I tell the kids I'm going to keep my eye on you, walk out. They think that's the coolest thing ever. You know, I can turn it around backwards and make them look like I'm looking in a weird place. Fun with disabilities. It's awesome. One thing I learned as a very educated person who functioned in my world pretty well, all of a sudden I couldn't navigate my world anymore. All of a sudden I didn't have the skills. Nobody, my parents, my schools, had not given me the means to navigate my world. I didn't know what to do next. I didn't have those skills, and those are skills to navigate your world through that. 2 stories about kids. I won't tell you their names, but they did give me permission to do this. There's a student from my class. He's about 17, 18 years old, I don't know if you know anybody from Wellington. Wellington's like another world out there. I love the Wellington kids. Hard fighting rancher kid, drinking, fighting, tough, rough kid, wanted to go into the military. At that point, he couldn't go to the Iraq conflict without a high school diploma. I have a huge soft spot for vets. My dad was a vet, so I worked hard with this kid to try to get him a diploma, try to get him ready. A lot of talk about going to Iraq, 18 years old. You know, you can't have a beer, but you can go kill someone, you know. Can't, you know, all these weird dynamics that happens with an 18-year-old going over there. He comes back from Iraq, and I don't know if you know any vets who come back. I know lots of them, and they're all struggling because all of a sudden they can't navigate this world. I get a phone call in the middle of the night, 3 o'clock after he comes back from Iraq. His mom's on the phone and says, "Hey, Brian, my son has a weapon in his hand and he's going to kill someone." Screaming. I go, "Put him on the phone." Get him on the phone. I go, "Drop the weapon." Clank. "Drop the person." Clunk. "Go to bed." Clank. I'm like, then finally, "What happened?" "He went to bed. What did you say?" I'll finish that story at the end. Second student comes in, very intelligent, tests off the chart intellectually, socially a gamer, plays a lot of games. Usually gamers are typically very intelligent, and they get lost in the world. They don't have how to navigate. Sometimes they don't have the skills to do this. This one in particular did not. Got lost in the back. 16 years old, suicidal, and ready to drop out of school. Landed at our school, had been missing 3 days of school a week, and I'll finish that story at the end. So hold on to those 2 thoughts around navigation. So the skills that we work with when we deal with students are just like the same skills. Remember, the skills are, how do you deal with the objects, and how do you deal with people when you talk to them? First skill we always teach kids is anger management. Anger management, why do we teach it? People go, "Why would you get into someone's emotional life?" Why don't we? I mean, why don't we? All you got to do is drive around Fort Collins and let someone drive, and you know who's number one because they're all telling you that you're number one. Very angry drivers in Fort Collins. I don't even drive on college. Kind of freaks me out a little bit. So we teach them anger management, not to be a therapist, but to say, here's how you deal with this within the confines of our world. Second one we do is we teach a model called transactional analysis. If you lived through the 70s, my mom was a psychotherapist. How about this? My dad, lieutenant colonel in the Marines, professional football player, hoo-ah. My mom's psychotherapist. You get why I'm a little crazy. In our house, we couldn't use the F word. Nobody said feelings. Bad idea. So we teach them how to use their words. Most students, most adults, when they don't like something, they will behave their way out of a request. If a kid doesn't like something, they'll do all kinds of behaviors that they learn, how to shut down, they get angry, they get defiant, they do all these things, but none of them really communicates their basic needs. So we teach them to use your words. Instead of behaving your way out of a request, talk your way out of it, use your words. We teach them how to be assertive in their world. Instead of being passive and falling back and going, nobody likes me, everybody hates me, or getting out there and fighting, in the United States, you don't like something, complain. They'll bring you back more food, they'll replace your things. But that's a hurtful way to move through your world. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in doing harm to get your way. So we teach kids that very, very thin middle ground, how to get your needs met without doing damage to yourself and without doing damage to others. We teach them problem solving. All of you, just to get here today, you had hundreds of problems, little things, with objects or with systems. It could be your health, it could be your car, it could be transportation. You have all these problems, but who's teaching kids to deal with problems? We go deal with your problems. That's one way we deal with them, or we solve their problems for them, which teaches them that they're not capable of doing that. I say, I can be your resource, but you solve this problem. Because we're trying to teach, what Discovery does, and this is the Reformation, we're trying to teach them ownership. We're trying to teach them they can stand on their own 2 feet. We're trying to teach them accountability. And when they find these skills and they can stand on their own, then they can find their own way. And that's what it's like to be an adult. When are you an adult in our culture? You're 16 years old, you do the most dangerous thing you'll ever do in your life. You're more in danger driving down I-70 than you are in Afghanistan right now. Statistically, you are more safe there than you are in a car. At 18, now you can vote and you can take up a gun and go to war, but you can't have a beer. And then at 21, you can have a beer. So when are you an adult and what does a functional adult look like? I would say we don't have a really good idea. So to actually sit down and proactively teach people this is how you do it is going to lead to these things like sustainability. How are you going to sustain things if you can't communicate, if you can't connect with people, if you don't even know who you are to fit within that? If you have so much apathy because you felt like you've been run over by a system, no, I don't see those things happening if we don't elevate all. If we don't elevate all. We can't leave anybody behind. Doesn't work in a democratic system. Doesn't work in a democratic system. The last skill we teach is conflict resolution. And we teach conflict resolution last because it is the most complicated skill we as human beings will ever do. Because human beings are dynamic. You don't fix other people. And we have this concept where I've seen that you can fix people. You can't fix people. What you can do is you can negotiate with them. You can draw boundaries. And that is a very sophisticated skill. And the crazy thing is you can teach it to a 5-year-old. You can teach it to a 90-year-old. My question is, who's doing it? I haven't seen it. So to me, that's where the reform comes in. It's a different way of moving through our worlds. It's a different way of addressing those things. It's a nice way to start. The success has been fairly phenomenal. We've had 2 studies done, one by the University of Oregon, one by the UNC. It says we're in, I don't know how many states, I've lost track. We're in 20-some states. We're in several, almost close to 1,000 school districts. I've trained over 1,000 kids. I've trained over 1,000 adults. And it functions. It works. And it is grassroots, which I really appreciate. It's not someone on high in an ivory tower saying, this is how you're going to do things, and this is how we're going to fix things. And it works from the ground on up. How did the story end? The kid from Iraq comes back into my room the next day, said, what happened? I said, what's going on? He says, in Iraq, the military taught me, when you start, you don't stop. If you don't kill, then they will kill you. And I was actually entrenched. And if anybody knows the military, that's how you have to be. You have to live that way. And you make this transition to civilian life, and all of a sudden you're in this other world. Why did you stop? He said, the road you laid down worked. Bottom line, the road you laid down worked. The kid is in great shape right now. He's got a wife, he's got a kid, he's got a job, he's functioning, he's moving through all the stuff that comes from Iraq. Not to brag or sound conceited, but he found the road. He found a way to not navigate his world through these skills and through these attitudinal things that he came up with. The kid who, very intelligent, very shut down, ready to drop out, is now graduated from high school, did not miss 1 day of school in 4 years. Did not miss 1 day of school. Went on to Front Range, got an EMT training, is now moving towards becoming a paramedic, is now working for Poudre Valley Hospital. How do you navigate your world? To me, that's the reform. Because if you can't navigate your world, not based on some external force, not based on some external model, but some internal gauge landscape, points of emotional, social, spiritual, physical landscape, then the way the world is changing so quickly, we'll get lost. And to me, I love these other, I'm a TEDx fan now. I know what it is. It's on a computer, I guess. I guess you can get it, I hear you can get internet now on a computer thing. I'm not sure, but I'm really looking forward to that. Anytime I have any problems, I just call my kids up. How do I answer the phone? How do I get my, here, Dad. And then for me, the loss of my eye and not knowing how to navigate that, it has changed the way I've taught fundamentally, and fundamentally, more importantly, it changed the way I parented. And that's probably the biggest feedback I get is after I train both kids and adults is it's a great parenting model. Let me think. I think that's all I got. How did I do for Tom, Bob? I do okay for time? Okay. This takes me 4 days of training to train adults, and the biggest feedback I get time and time again is it's not long enough. So, boy, I really like what we're doing here. And here's the other thing I really love. I had no idea what audience I was talking to. Had no idea. Was I talking to? What I love is how many people that are under 25 here. That is very inspiring to me. And people ask, people are so scared about our generation and our kids, and I have no fear whatsoever. Oh my gosh, the number of negative or bad decisions. If I could do what they did, if the possibility to do wrong was available back in the 70s when I was young, kids are making great decisions, man. I have huge hope for the future. Socially conscious, moving forward, learning skills, doing stuff like this. So thank you very much. That's all I got to say.